The Prime Minister has cut short his UK travel plans to focus on the situation in Ukraine. He's been chairing a Cobra meeting to address the crisis. While Boris Johnson might have ended his UK tour a bit early, we haven't. This week, we're going around former Red Wall seats, historic Labour strongholds, which switched to the Conservatives in 2019, asking about their voting intention. Today, we're heading to Bolsover, a former mining community in the East Midlands. And our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, is there. Hi, Will.
Good afternoon. Yes, you'll remember, as will many journalists who had to work the 2019 election, as well as the tens of thousands, possibly millions of people that stayed up that night to watch the election results in 2019. The celebration of Conservatives when they did take the Red Wall seats like this one in Bolsover, where the MP Dennis Skinner held this seat for 49 years. Coalfields across the Midlands, these northern powerhouses where the Labour stronghold was so strong, nobody would have ever expected that a Tory would one day be an MP in areas like Bolsover. It's a constituency of around 70,000 people, around 80,000 people in the district, so not just Bolsover as a town, the mining towns dotted around, which faced devastating effects of the closure of the pits throughout the 80s and the 90s. Bolsover's pit closed in 91. When we look back to that election of 2019 and we remember the celebrations of people like Boris Johnson, one of the things he said on the morning was, thank you for lending me your vote. That's because people here aren't necessarily and weren't necessarily die-hard Conservative fans. They hadn't turned over and they were going to be blue forever. They mainly did vote for Brexit. That's one of the reasons why so many red seats turned towards the Tories after being Labour voters for generations. So with all of this stories recently about the parties, with the COVID lockdowns and so many people moving away from the favour of Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party that they did manage to gain in the 2019 election, we've come out to Bolsover and many other places across Britain to speak to people who did turn to the Tories. How do they feel now, and do they trust their politicians?
I've never really trusted them. They're all different colours, but they're like Smarties. They all taste just the same, so I don't think it matters very much.
He's not a very good Prime Minister. The parties would normally not be very important, but in fact it's a question of trust. And he's certainly done away with that trust, and people don't believe any of the messages they hear now. That's a big problem. It seems a bit trivial that it's all about parties, but then again, there were so many when everybody else was playing by the rules.
No, I don't really trust politicians. Some politicians I do, some I don't. The majority I feel are disappointing.
I think Keir Starmer's more trustworthy, but it's a bit too gentle to be too much of a gentleman, I think, to be an opposition leader. He's not giving enough stick to the other side.
It has been a betrayal. I wouldn't trust the Conservatives again. Definitely not. As I say, I would steer towards Labour. It was a good Labour constituency, this, and I know Dennis is retired, but he was a good politician for this area, and he brought a lot of jobs back to this area when the mines closed.
I think Boris Johnson was good apart from the parties and all that's happened, but apart from that, he tried to get free broadband, he tried to level up, and HS2 has tried to do a lot of good things. But now it's been overshadowed. COVID came in, and suddenly everybody's looking at parties. So he's sunk his own canoe, really, but his start was quite good and promising.
I've always voted Labour, and always will do, because we're working class. And he's on about this levelling up on one thing and another. We can't see anything what he's doing this way on. Up north and Midlands, he's not. I don't think there's any levelling up been done up here. It's all down that end, down London, isn't it? No, the sooner he goes, the better, and that's all I've got to say.
It's always great to hear the real everyday views of voters here in the Derbyshire town, Bolsover and so many towns along this Red Wall tour that we're taking at the moment. You would have heard people in that set of Vox Pops saying how affectionately they think of Dennis Skinner, who held this seat for 49 years, from 1970 to 2019. He was a socialist. He was referred to affectionately by his friends as the Beast of Bolsover, probably with a sense of terror from his enemies in the Tory party. You'll remember the way that he was often known for his outbursts, particularly on the opening of Parliament. Black Rod, he had many funny outbursts. People said that they would like to vote for him if he was running again. He's now retired. Mark Fletcher, the Conservative MP, I think he would very much like to keep this seat. It's quite interesting that so many of the people that I spoke to in that clip that you just saw there are very unsure, because they did give their vote to the Tories in 2019, and even with each of these things that has happened recently in the last 6 months before Christmas, and with COVID and all of the decisions that some people would say quite rightly had to be made about protecting the country, a lot of people are still very undecided. And if there was an election tomorrow, it is very hard to say how these Red Wall seats, how these turning Tory seats would vote. A lot of people, however, that I did spoke to when Boris Johnson said in 2019 that he had people had lent him their votes, a lot of people, if there was an election tomorrow, I think they would be reclaiming that debt.
Will Hollis, I loved listening to those voices. Thanks so much for bringing them to us. Thank you, Will Hollis from Bolsover.